Welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. Hello, Rose.
Hello, Christine. And today's topic is, why aren't we talking about climate change?
That is a very good question.
Well, for those first-time listeners, Christine and I started this podcast a little more than a year ago with the primary goal of making climate part of everyone's everyday conversation. I'm not an expert. Neither one of us are experts. Christine is a little bit more of an expert than I am. And
you just got the climate reality training, so that probably makes you more of an expert than me right now.
Well, so Christine wrote a blog,
350 or Bust, for 5 years, from 2009 to 2014, pretty much every day. So was I a little driven? Yes, absolutely. Was I burnt out after that? Yes, absolutely.
And you also wrote a book.
Mm-hmm.
And was that before or after?
That was in 2015. So that would have been after. Because, again, I guess decision to blog about climate change was very similar to why you and I decided to do this podcast. It's like, we need to be having this conversation. And when I kind of had my climate awakening in 2009, I thought, oh my goodness, like, I just need to tell people. I need to tell my friends. I need to tell my family, like, this is what's going on. And then, wow, they'll be like as concerned as I am and realize that this really is the crucial issue that we're facing, like the survival of, not the planet, because as you've said before, the planet will be fine. Mother Earth will be fine. It's just kind of the human race that's in peril now. And surprise, surprise. No, people,
no.
It turns out that
I thought the same thing. I thought when we started this podcast, I was so excited and, sharing it with all my friends and my kids. I have to say, Connor is up to date. He told me yesterday he's all caught up. He listens every week and has a couple of his cohorts he's got online. I'm sure they're not as good as him, but he's probably our biggest fan.
Wow, he gets a special reward in heaven for that one.
maybe something extra for Christmas this year. I don't know.
There you go.
But I thought the same thing. I thought, once I tell my friends, they're all going to be like, oh my gosh, thank you for doing the research and putting the information out there. And yeah.
We're so grateful, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that what they say every time they see you?
every time they're like, you're doing a podcast? Oh yeah, I guess you did mention that. No, I've never listened. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
But it isn't about the fact that they're listening to your podcast. The fact that, it's that you want people to be engaged with this issue, because once you realize what's at stake, literally our children's future, it's mind-boggling that people don't drop everything and go, oh, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But to backtrack a bit, what I have learned in my slightly over 10 years journey as a very engaged climate activist is that people can only cope with so much. And the whole climate change, global aspect of it, most people find overwhelming. So I don't want to beat our own drum, but we and all of the other climate activists that we know are a very special group of people that we can take this global issue and look at it closely and not turn away. It isn't everybody that can do that. And what I learned, and I've talked about this door knocking that I did back in 2010 and early in my climate journey, because that was what I was going to do, was talk to people about climate change. And so I
Bless
became
you. Mm-hmm.
the climate change evangelist and went door knocking because it was the hardest thing I could think of to do. People have a lot on their plates. There are people who I could see their health was failing. There were women that opened the doors with little kids, and I know what the rates of domestic abuse is out there. So some of those women were being abused in their own homes. And then there were the ones who were like completely dismissive. That's fine, but I truly don't believe that that's the majority, especially not now in 2020 when California is on fire and there's all of this incredible heat that's happening.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, so I subscribe to, we've talked about this before, Emily Atkins' newsletter called Heated. And she came out this week and she said that the reporting that's going out in major media, mainstream media, about the fires, about the hurricanes simultaneously hitting the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, there were 2 tropical storms hitting back to back. The excessive heat in California, they're all being presented as weather events.
As one-offs.
Yes, as kind of what I was saying in my podcast last week, as notes in a song, but they're individual notes and they're not being strung together. The overarching story is this is climate reality, and this is a preview. We're getting a preview of coming attractions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you liked the Towering Inferno, stay tuned. And I found that really interesting. So I started really looking at the news more closely and realized that 90% of the time, that's the truth. It's a one-off story. It's not talking about climate. Why isn't it talking about climate? Then there was an article this morning, Thomas Friedman published, and he talked about the danger of normalizing what we're experiencing, whether it's the COVID thing. Are we just normal now that it's just normal to go out with a mask on? It's normal to stay 6 feet away from people. It's normal to hunker down in your house, to not go to the movies, are we just going to be to the point where we're accepting that? And if you extrapolate that further to the climate issue, are we just accepting this? Like you said, the West is on fire. It's on fire. It's not just California. It's Oregon. It's Washington State. That's not being presented by the media. They're reporting that, yes, there's evacuations, and yes, there's some firefighters been stranded in a certain area. It's one-off stories. This is all interrelated. You and I know it. Anybody who's gone through climate reality knows it. Anybody who's, Emily Atkins, anybody who's involved as an activist knows this. Why are we turning away? Why are the majority of people turning away? And yes, they have a lot on their plates. So in meditation, what's come up for me in the last few days is safety. I just keep hearing the word safety. And I think this is a safety issue. I think we feel it's a root chakra. We don't feel safe. And so when we don't feel safe, we're in denial, maybe. And you're an energy person. What do you get around that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to bring up. I would say a couple of things. That where we're going is, so our society is totally fear-based.
Mm-hmm. And we're fed it every day. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we are encouraged not to feel safe. That is our kind of the baseline. And I think in your last week's podcast, you talked about all of the antidepressants that people are on. It's how does fear manifest itself? As one of the ways is depression, because your system never feels safe. And
well, it's part of the consumption model. Fear of missing out, fear of not having enough, fear of you're not drinking the right beer, so you're not going to get the right gal. I don't watch that much television, but I do tune into Rachel Maddow at 9:00, and even on MSNBC, it's all, now that you're home, you're using your computer all the time, and your chances of being hacked. And so Norton's trying to sell you, they're $49.99 a month,
Mhm.
whatever. It's all consumption. That's how we're motivated by
How
fear.
we're motivated. And I would also say, actually, to go even deeper or a broader perspective, I would say that that's what patriarchy is based on. And we're a patriarchal society. So fear-based,
Mm-hmm.
keep
Mm-hmm.
women in their place, keep people who are people of color, indigenous people. It's because if we're not in control, and by we I mean
White men.
that, well, and it's a system. It's the
No, it is.
hierarchy. That's what it's based on. It's based on control, and the whole idea that at some point you have to release control. Like we can control nature. Never mind other people. We control nature, right? That's what's got us to where we are in Western society. And again, I don't want to give up my internet or my computer or my central heating, but this is what I truly believe, and it's not just me. There's a lot of people talking about this. This is our choice. As we continue down that path of fear and destruction, or we just release that need for control and then allow for what? We don't really know. But that is...
Well, it's scary not to know.
Exactly. And I mean, my mother, bless her, she's passed away in 2014, but she was pretty fear-based, and she wouldn't even use her cruise control on her car because she didn't trust her car to not, like, she wanted to be in control all of the time. And so that's kind of a metaphor. It turns out nature is going to give us, is currently giving us a huge wake-up call. Hey, turns out humans,
you're not in control.
You're just a little fly I can swat. Although, having said that, that's not really what Gaia is inviting us to do. Inviting us to coexist, right? What's that bumper sticker you see I'm heading to Vancouver Island in a few weeks. I'll see more of those there. Coexist. That's the invitation. But wow, when you're scared, feels scary.
So going back to the whole safety thing. So it's hitting us in a physical safety, personal security, employment, property. What are all the things that in Maslow's hierarchy? Safety. So the baseline is physiology, right? And then the second thing is safety. The second level is safety. And before we can get to love and self-esteem and self-actualization, we have to feel safe. And right now, nothing feels safe.
And you brought up the root chakra. So the root chakra is about security, your place in the world, feeling safe in that place in the world. And I thought it was quite interesting because, I guess maybe everybody doesn't know where the root chakra is located, but it's, the root of your spine, your tailbone, that area, the bottom of your spine. And I thought it was really interesting during the COVID crisis, right at the beginning in March, when what did we run out of was toilet paper. Completely a root chakra issue and fear. It's so fascinating, but that's stability. The only way to get through fear is really to face it, and
you have to walk through it.
Yeah,
I did this workshop way at the beginning of my personal growth journey, and we had this exercise. I'll never forget it. In fact, I still have the arrow. It was two partners, and there was an arrow that you put into the soft part of your throat, and the end of the arrow that had the feather on it, there was a notch and a piece of wood, and your partner held it against you. You held it into your throat so that you could feel that tip.
Okay.
And it wasn't a rubber tip.
Okay.
And the exercise was to walk into it. And literally talking about fear. I mean, so doing a whole room, I was the last one to do it because I was a chicken more so than other people. And this was my first personal transformation workshop I had ever done. And this was like way mind blowing for me. So the idea was you'd be taking your arms and kind of flapping them like a giant, like you're an eagle's wings, and breathing really deeply. And you would step in to that arrow with the point in your throat. And what would happen was the arrow would bend and it would break. It would shatter. Now, these were just regular arrows. And no, I don't recommend anybody doing this at home.
Yes, do not do this at home.
But it was a metaphor for fear, because the fear that you felt was just incredible. You're thinking, oh my God, I'm actually going to puncture my esophagus or whatever. When you walk into fear, it shatters. It's just an illusion. It's just an illusion. So how do we get people to feel safe? And I think it's about giving up the control, knowing that you're never in control. That's just an illusion too.
Yeah. And I guess I want to be a bit of a devil's advocate here and say, well, if you've got 3 mouths to feed, 3 little ones to feed, and you and your spouse, or, maybe you're a single parent and you lost your job and COVID isn't allowing you to look easily for a new one. How does one address that kind of fear at that individual level in this time? Because we're talking about the collective fear. And part of that collective fear is that we have become focused on the individual to the point where we don't realize how much community well-being is good for everybody. It's not just good for my neighbor. If my neighbor can eat, it's actually good for me too. In a whole bunch of levels. But we've lost that at some point, I have to say. And again, America is an easy target because you're so big and loud and flashy. And
gaudy,
kind of the epitome of the consumer society. Like, you've taken that to the level where people are like, I'm not wearing a mask. That is trampling on my individual rights, as opposed to other societies where that's just part of what they do is recognize that the collective is good, often to the detriment. And again, the rest of us, America has led the way in individualism, but self-expression, and that needed to change. Like, women needed to be able to vote, and all of those things that are part of individualization, human rights and LGBTQ rights, everything that's the light side. But there's a dark side to that where you lose your sense of community.
Well, and it's kind of interesting. So yes, the U.S. has, or America. I think I say the U.S. when I talk to you because every Canadian I've ever met said, well, we're American too, right?
Okay, not me.
Okay. We've led the way in a lot of self-expression. Absolutely. And those things are not to be discounted. Just like the patriarchy has got us to where we are. But now it's time. We're standing at a crossroads. Now it's time to shift gears. And can the U.S. learn from the success of countries that collaborate
in the COVID
or the Paris Accord? We've decided that, oh no, we're not part of that anymore. Well, not we collectively, but
yes,
our fearless leader has decided. Okay, so there's a strength. There's a cowboy. The American cowboy is very iconic in our minds. Conquer the West, all that kind of stuff. Okay, and that's got us here. The Industrial Revolution, that had to happen. But now we have the technologies that we need. Can we switch gears? Can we switch gears and be collaborative? Yeah. And that's, to me, that's the divine feminine. That's the feminine energy rising. Women know how to collaborate. Women are nurturers.
Speaking in the general sense.
Feminine energy versus masculine energy. Mm-hmm. Can the U.S. open its mind and its heart and say, just because we've led up till now doesn't mean that I can't look at the person standing next to me or the country that's next door to me and say, what can I learn from them? What can I learn from Canada? What can I learn from Mexico? What can I learn from South America? What can I learn from France, Germany, et cetera, et cetera.
New Zealand. We can all learn
Mm.
from New Zealand and Iceland, I think. Yeah, that's the question because, I mean, there's a lot of ego in the sort of when you think of the United States, you don't think of it as being humble.
Well, there's an understatement.
So, pride goes before the fall. We'll see.
Yes, and we're seeing the fall. We're seeing the fall.
So our question is, why don't we talk about climate change? So have we solved that? Do we know the answer, Rose?
I think there's lots of different reasons. I think that, all worth exploring, and hopefully our listeners are putting on this, like we said, this podcast is to get you talking. So some good news. There's some great news about electric vehicles this week. I don't know if you've picked up on that. A number of states have, Delaware, the state, Tampa Bay, the city, a number of other countries are all going to electric buses. GM has partnered with Nikola, and they're going to be making electric trucks for Nikola.
Nikola, as in Nikola Tesla, Nikola, is that right?
Right, but it's a separate company. I think it's an offshoot to kind of give
the
bird to Tesla.
There's Tesla, and now there's another company, separate company, that has Mr. Tesla's first name. So I love that.
Yep. And then there's also Bill Gates has partnered with Volkswagen to build battery supplies for EVs. Gates and Volkswagen have got some kind of partnership that they've got a new startup that's doing that. So lots of EV stuff. And I'm like, okay. I mean, there is a turning.
Yeah.
It's not, as we're saying with the United States, it's not the feds that are leading it. It's not the government that is leading it. It's the states, the cities, it's private industry. But we'll take it when we get it.
Exactly. Faithful listener of ours, Jackie, brought to my attention just on the subject of electric vehicles, and I'm flagging it now for us to talk about. There was on Al Jazeera recently a documentary about the dark side of clean energy or green energy, and talking about the rare earth minerals that are used in it. So Jackie and I had a conversation about it, and I think that's a conversation worth having here. So we will do that in the future. But I, of course, love electric vehicles. We have our Chevy Bolt, which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And this weekend we had our daughter's Tesla parked in our garage charging. Well, not charging all weekend, but she was up visiting. So that's very exciting. I just like the idea of it. My husband actually wants to drive around in it. I'm just glad she's driving it and I don't need to drive it. But.
Yeah, so I wonder, this is playing devil's advocate. So California now, they're having blackouts. They're shutting down the grid. So what happens to electric vehicles when they shut down the grid?
Yeah. So that's a good point. And again, probably a part of a different podcast. But I know in the past, what Tesla has done is, for example, when there was an evacuation because of a hurricane in, was it Florida or one of the southern states, Tesla announced that, I didn't know they could do this, but apparently they can. They extended the range of the batteries by computer, like from a central computer, to help people
Interesting.
leave. Yeah. But that's a good conversation to have. And it points to a conversation that I think we might be having on our next podcast about what it means to be prepared in these chaotic times, and probably having some solar chargers, some solar panels, whatever it is of your own is a good idea. But that's not our tip for today. So you've got the good news covered, and we have an action tip, which, as we often do, encourage each of you to talk to at least one other person about climate change this week. Of course, ideally, I would say talk to somebody about it every day. But that's just me. I mean, when I was living in a city, when I was blogging about climate change, I'd be talking about it to people at the bus stop. I'd be talking about pretty much everywhere. And perhaps that was a little excessive, but it really is an important...
only if when they saw you coming, they were like, run away, run away.
Well, it was always to strangers, so they weren't ever, it wasn't usually the same one more than once. But of course, with my family and friends as well. But yeah, so that's my action tip. I challenge you. For our sanity tip, what can we do on an individual level to look at our fear?
I would challenge people to look up Maslow's hierarchy or root chakra, if that's something that's unfamiliar with you. Just read a little bit about it and see what comes up for you. I'm having a lot of issues around safety right now. And while I have my own stuff going on that's popping that to the surface, the empath in me believes that it's the collective that we're really feeling unsafe. Not unwarranted.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we address it? And there's some good tips on grounding and those kinds of exercises when you look at your root chakra.
Maybe we'll put a meditation up or a tapping
that'd be great.
Video on fear on our website. Wonderful. Always good to chat.
Yep. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.